Political operative Roger Stone will go on trial for charges stemming from the special counsel's investigation. That is happening in November, but he will be back in court for a status hearing next month.
The judge overseeing Stone's case is the same judge who sentenced Paul Manafort to an additional 3.5 years in prison Wednesday. Following that sentence, the Manhattan District Attorney announced charges against former Trump campaign chairman for residential mortgage fraud. He also is accused of conspiracy and falsifying business records. All of these are felony charges. Joining us to dig into all of this is former federal prosecutor Gene Rossi, who has nearly 3 decades of criminal and civil litigation experience. Gene, welcome back.
Good to be here.
Be one of my You will be one of my first phone calls when the bad men come for me and I need help. So
and that's a good guy to know.
That's right. Just know that you're on the list. Gene, you got to get me out of here.
Feel better just having him around.
Exactly.
Personally.
The third indictment here, the one that came down from New York, this to a lot of casual and not casual observers of the legal scene looks pretty gross. What do you think of this?
Well, in the 30 years with DOJ, I would never have approved that indictment, and here's why. You have a defendant, 70 years old, indicted in D.C. and Eastern District of Virginia. 2 judges made a decision to give him a combined 90 months. And now you have a third indictment by a state prosecutor. And I got to say this, the decision to indict the third time by Cy Vance, to me, is more political than being a prosecutor. And it bothers me because the purpose of that indictment is just one reason, to be a catch-all if the president pardons Paul Manafort.
Right.
Here's what I don't like. If a Democrat gets back in the White House, and the Republicans hope that never happens again, but a Democrat will get back in the White House, that president may pardon somebody. It could be a drug case, could be a fraud case. And if you have an aggressive state prosecutor, they're going to say, you know what? I'm going to indict them because the double jeopardy clause doesn't prevent me from doing that. And you'll have the same situation. It's going to haunt the Democrats. That's why I don't like it.
What is the overlap between these new charges and the charges that he's already faced?
The overlap is extraordinary. I read the indictment, not all of it today. I read most of it. And the facts are very similar to what was brought out in the Manafort trial. And I watched a lot of that trial. So you have the federal charge in Virginia. You have the Manhattan charge, and they overlap. I don't care what they say. It overlaps. And here's what also bothers me. Why is Cy Vance focusing on Manafort, who's already been hammered twice, relatively? I thought he should have had a tougher sentence, but he did get 90 months. Why is he focusing on this guy when if you walk down the main drag of Wall Street, every 7th person probably committed major bank and mortgage fraud? Why don't you focus on those people rather than issuing what I consider a political statement?
Those are good points. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, what do you think would have been, what sentence would you have handed down to Manafort collectively between the two? You know, one, he pleaded guilty, the other one, the jury found him guilty. But what do you think was fair? I mean,
that's an excellent question. I was hard on the president, and I was very hard on Manafort. I would have hammered him. Here's why. He pleaded guilty in D.C. and Virginia. And then after he pleaded guilty, the prosecutors tried to give him the benefit of a reduction. He lied, he lied, he lied. I would have recommended 15 to 20 years because you got to send a message to cooperators that if you come on our team, you can't be leaving the office and having your attorneys call the White House and divulge what's happening in the meeting with the prosecutor. 15 to 20 years, and I have to mildly criticize the Office of Special Counsel. I trained 5 people there, so I have a lot of fondness for them. They did not specifically ask for a sentence in either the D.C. case or in Virginia. A mistake. I would have stood up, owned it, and said, Judge Ellis, Judge Jackson, the United States recommends 15 years for the following reasons. And I want to care if he's 70 years old.
How often do people get 15 years in federal prison for what are entirely white-collar crimes? Is that unusual? It sounds unusual to a casual observer.
To a casual observer, the guidelines are relatively generous on white-collar fraud, tax charges, bank fraud. Drug cases, we hammer them.
Yep.
And I feel that the white-collar cases should have more stringent sentences. But Paul Manafort, he's 70 April 1st. He's in a wheelchair. He's got health concerns. I got to tell you, the judges, they could have given a more stiff sentence, but at the end of the day, he's serving 90 months.
Yeah, he may not ever actually.
He may not live.
He may not actually live to see the outside of prison.
And
he's
this
lost $25 million.
Yeah.
And by the way, he's guilty of tax fraud and lying, really.
Yeah.
And I know there's other things.
He's got to sign a restitution order, I think $25 million. And here's what bothers me. As a prosecutor, I tried to keep politics out of the room when I made a decision. Okay, I think it could have been a stiffer sentence, but at the end of the day, you had two judges, one who was an Obama appointee, decide that 90 months is appropriate.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of bothered by some people, not everybody, who wants Paul Manafort on a rack, waterboard, and have his fingernails pulled out. And if we had the death penalty, we should have sought the death penalty. He's sentenced. Let's move on. And I thought Vance issued a political statement, and it bothers me.
Yeah, I will say it was hard to see Judge Ellis saying he lived an otherwise blameless life, which is far from the truth. However, let's move on to another character in this drama, Roger Stone.
And I laugh when you ever say his name, okay?
Where are we in his case, and how serious are his charges? What do you think he's looking at?
He's looking at the end of the day, I think he'll probably get 4 to 5 years, maybe 3 to 5 years. He's in deep hurt, and here's why. You got Amy Jackson, former prosecutor, a phenomenal defense attorney. She doesn't play nice. She sees right through him. That book deal issue that she's kind of put aside for a month to decide, if I were the judge, I'd
violation of the gag order is the issue, right? Yeah.
I would yell and scream at him and said, if you even smirk when you're talking to me, I'm going to put you in jail. So she may just yell and admonish him, but the trial in November, I hate to say this, it's a layup, a slam dunk. We got basketball this weekend. It's a layup, a slam dunk.
Yeah.
Okay.
You think they'll get him on the witness tampering charge, though, where he said protect the plan, and that was because he's saying it's a joke. I think from a jury perspective, well, one, we don't know if he's going to take a plea or not, right? There's that possibility he could still do. But if he actually decides to fight this all the way,
which you could see him doing
just for the sort of theatrics and the never say die attitude. Do you think the witness tampering stuff will stick? Because
you're really on a roll here, asking me good questions.
What I do.
He's doing well. I had a lot of trials, 100 trials, and the witness tampering obstruction counts that I prosecuted, I shouldn't say this, but I lost most of them. For some reason, they're hard. In the jury's mind, witness tampering and obstruction, you need really bad stuff. And if he puts on a defense that he was joking, which a jury probably will believe.
I saw the transcript. I got to tell you, I found it credible enough as a jury. Now, could I tell you 100%?
Yeah.
No. But is there a chance that he was kidding around with this guy, and should he go to federal prison for that? I think, I think that's real.
He's got an argument, but that's not the only charge.
Of course. Right. Now, the other ones, he's
and what juries do, what juries always do, is if you have like 8 to 10 counts, they'll say, okay, we're going to give few to the prosecution. We're going to reward the defense because they did a good job. And that's probably what will happen. But on the really tough counts, I think it's a Zion Williamson slam dunk.
Wow, you're really into basketball right now.
I love basketball. It's my favorite time of year.
So you also have an interesting client we wanted to ask you about.
I do.
Daniels' original counsel, is that right? Who was involved in when the hush money thing was actually coming together?
Yep.
So walk us through what happened there, who was involved, how did that go down?
It's a great question. My firm and I represent Keith Davidson. Keith Davidson is the former attorney of Stormy Daniels. And based on what's come out in the public, and Keith has gone on TV, he's done a great job. I think he's been on 3 major shows. And here's what happened, according to public record and things that divulged by interviews. In September of 2016, the Trump campaign was contacted, obviously through Michael Cohen, that Stormy Daniels is out there, has an allegation. Mm-hmm. Then we have the famous Access Hollywood tape.
Right.
I think it was the 7th. All heck broke loose. And by the end of October, in the campaign, there was a fear that if this Stormy Daniels thing came out, it could sink his presidency. Okay? That's a lot different than the Edwards situation because he had already dropped out and he wasn't going anywhere. So on October 28th, a non-disclosure agreement, was signed, and $130,000 was wired from Cohen's account, whatever it was in Delaware, to Keith Davidson. And my client has talked about conversations regarding those transactions, and I think there's a very strong case against the President of the United States. I really do.
How much do we know about the President's direct involvement? I mean, Cohen has said he directed me to make these payments, and then he said, here's the reimbursements that I received, signed by Donald J. Trump in the form of checks. How much do we know about the President's direct involvement? Did he, in fact, direct Cohen to make these payments?
Well, I think on that question, I don't think Mr. Davidson has as much information as Michael Cohen. Here's the problem with Michael Cohen, and last time I got on the show, Buck agreed with me.
Whoa.
Yeah, Michael Cohen had arguably a couple big whoppers before his testimony.
Right.
One is, I never wanted a job in the White House, and you mentioned David Bussey and others.
I have personally spoken to people who can go into detail about how much he wanted a job in the White House.
And you got to read if you're a prosecutor, you got to read the transcript, because it could have been a bad question. Was he talking about after he got sworn in? But if you're talking about before, and this is on the public record and also based on Keith's interviews, Cohen did want to work either in the White House or the Department of Justice. He did. Who would not want to come with basically your father after he gets elected?
Right.
And Cohen treated Trump like a father.
Yeah, you can see that even now.
And of course you want to come to D.C., either the White House or the Justice Department. Boy, that would have been a disaster. But not as bad as Matt Whitaker. But that's my little joke. But here's the problem. If you didn't have the checks that corroborate Cohen's testimony, it would be a much tougher case.
And what about that little audio tape recording, too?
That's not good for the president.
Yeah.
That's very good for Cohen. It corroborates. And when you have a pathological liar like Cohen, perjury, arguably more perjury, I called 3 perjurers in two drug cases. And if you have corroboration, a jury will even believe a convicted perjurer. But you need good corroboration. And those checks that Junior signed, Alan Weisselberg, our buddy, he signed, and also the president signed, that's very bad evidence for President Trump. Very bad.
Interesting stuff.
Gene, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Great to see you, sir.
Thank you.
Coming up on Rising, we've talked about the numbers in the 2020 budget proposal and the politics behind it. We'll get some insight from the man that helped shape Ronald Reagan's budgets of the 80s and why he thinks Donald Trump is getting it all wrong when it comes to fiscal responsibility. That's coming up